Count. We are live, going live in 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Those impromptu Sports Refuge podcast live streams. This was one of the things I wanted to talk about. I know a lot of people have had their own thoughts and opinions on the recent announcement of the former Washington Redskins, former Washington football team, announcing the rebrand and their name. They are now the Washington Commandos, for those people who have been either in a coma or under a rock the past 4 or 5 days. I am Earl Holland, of course, also a Washington, I guess, a self-admitting Washington football fan. Along with me is someone I've had on the show several times, including on several podcasts where we discuss jerseys and things like that. And he is also a Washington Commandos football team fan. And of course, you guys have seen him a lot. We're going to talk a lot about this whole rebrand and things like that. This is Ben Penserga, friend of the show and jersey expert and a jersey collector. Ben, thank you for coming on the podcast, especially doing it on such short notice. But I know this is one thing that I had a feeling you would talk about and discuss. And I know, again, it being one of your favorite teams as well. I mean, depending on how it's fallen in popularity comparing to the hierarchy of the other teams that you follow.
Yeah, no problem, man. Always happy to be on and always happy to talk uniforms. So where do we begin?
First thing I wanted to discuss when it came to the whole idea of the rollout, we're going to have to go all the way back to 18 months ago when they decided to retire the previous name of the Washington Redskins. And I know it's one of those things that people who grew up watching the team and they're sort of in that mindset of like in Coming to America, where when they're talking about Muhammad Ali and the barber says his mama named him Clay, I'm gonna call him Clay. And I know it's one of those things where people are going to still call them by that name. Some people are gonna call them the football team because they want to call that. And there's some people, it may take a little bit of getting used to calling them the Commanders, but going from the start to the rebranding to the interim name to now, what are your thoughts about that whole progression?
Well, first I want to say I thought the change was warranted. I mean, we don't have to really go into the discussion there, but I wasn't really, I know a lot of people were upset about it and, a lot of hand wringing of just like, oh, but it doesn't matter to me what the name is, honestly, because once they start winning, it'll be fine. That'll cure a lot of stuff. And when they did the Washington football team, I didn't mind that. And, we're getting into this new name now with the Commanders. It's going to take some getting used to. But again, if they start winning, then it's going to really heal a lot, I think. And people will forget it. And just like when they won the division last year, I'm sure a lot of people ran and got those shirts. People got hyped. It was fine. So winning cures a lot. So I'm not really worried about that. But as far as the actual rollout, yes, it could be better, and I'm sure we'll go into it. And without previewing it too much, I think that what we saw Wednesday is really just Washington football team 1.5. And when when we have a couple of years down the road, I'm sure they'll tweak the uniforms a little bit. I even have read that they're already entertaining maybe another alternate uniform already, maybe in the future. So what we saw Wednesday, I don't think that'll be the finished product, and I don't think that's going to be the uniform we're going to see 10, 15 years from now for sure.
Yeah, maybe not even two or three, as you mentioned. I will say this, going back to it, I think the name change, uh, it was going to happen. The problem is looking at Dan Snyder, who is basically a pariah among Washington football fans. The biggest thing is how it came across. Basically, going back to the moment he said, "You could print this in big bold letters. I'm never changing the team's name." But then I know a lot of people will say, well, it might have been PC and all this stuff that caused him to cave in. No, it was about the money, which if you've seen some of the several incidents that have occurred under his tenure as owner, that a lot of times money trumps sometimes moral responsibility in doing things like that, which is the biggest thing. And then I've told you this on off the air and other times, but I always thought as a businessman, I don't know how he was so successful because seeing his business acumen, and especially when it came to procuring some of the trademarks that he could have had to maybe make sure that people wouldn't squat on some of those things, they didn't do that. And then they end up having to fight an uphill battle of trying to purchase some of those names, try to make sure they could find something that hasn't been owned already. Those are things that should have been even thought about years ago, even if you weren't going to change the name. And you could tell it stinks of being such a slapdash thing that unfortunately it took a national incident not related to that, in all honesty, to make them change. It's sort of like one of those things where you're thinking, why change it now when it feels like money is the answer as opposed to being, some type of social conscience thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what it is, really. It's the public pressure that makes these people change. It makes everyone change, and I think it's a pretty good comparison to talk about the Guardians, the Cleveland baseball team, for the same reason that we are talking about the rebranding in Washington. And but that's fine. I don't really particularly want to discuss Daniel Snyder for a lot of reasons. And if you check your news, I'm sure you'll see some more reasons why we really shouldn't be giving that man any more time. But I am excited to see the uniforms at least in action because we've seen still photos of them. I saw photoshops of I think the team had posted some photoshops of some of the guys in action in the uniforms, but it's actually to see guys running around wearing them, I think that it might change my opinion about them. But I got some thoughts. I know you do too, and they're not all positive, but we got some thoughts here, I guess, to talk about these Commanders uniforms.
Yeah, my first thing is looking at the uniforms. They're not nice. I think everybody is starting. One of the things I've heard was Arizona Cardinals 2.0 when comparing some of those uniforms, especially with the faded numbers on the home uniform or the white uniform. I guess that'll be more the away one. I am wondering if they were going to be going all red all the time, or they're going to go red and white. And that's something it took a while getting used to after going away for a while with the gold pants, and then they finally started going back in the post the post Bruce Allen era, and they started doing that a lot more. But that was one of my one concerns. The other thing, looking at it, and we mentioned this off air, is looking at it, there are no defining stripes on the side, whether they're piping or anything else, and it feels so weird, and it looks like honestly a pair of pajamas, especially when you look at both the black and the burgundy uniforms. I guess Jim Zorn's guess on the colors finally came to fruition when it came to the redesign. And that's another thing. All black jerseys, it's been done to death, from the Jaguars to the Ravens to probably the Raiders, if they even entertained that thought. And it's like, these make no sense of having an all black uniform. It's not even. I would have went all gold if you're going to do that. I'd go all gold. And I know the Color Rush ones were pretty ugly. But I think an all gold one would have been better than an all black one.
Yeah, just a couple to follow up on a couple of your points. I'm definitely in agreement with the black uniforms. Paul Lucas, who runs Unity Watch, who is kind of the uniform nerd god, at least for me and a lot of other people. He has this term "black for black's sake," and that's what Washington has. It's basically the catch-all for teams who want to incorporate black in the uniform when there's no real logical reason for it. Black's not really an accent color for Washington. It never really has been, unless you count maybe some stripes, just a very, very simple stuff, but it's never been a prominent accent color. And it just kind of reeks of like, I don't know. It's like when you like, hey, I want to look cool, so let me wear black, or like, let me wear a leather jacket. That'll make me look cool. And I just don't think I don't think it works for Washington. It's the same reason it didn't work for the Cardinals with their all black uniforms. We're both big baseball fans. The Royals and the Mets went black for a while, and they're in the early 2000s, and I just don't think it's a good look. I mean, you have primary colors for a reason, so why do you want to incorporate black in there, except maybe just for the money part and some more merchandising? And the other point too that I'll agree with you is I always like to have contrast with uniforms. And we're about the same age. We grew up watching Washington at the same time, and the standard Washington uniform for the longest time, white jerseys and the maroon, the burgundy pants. Right, that was that's the Mark Rippon, Gary Clark, Art Monk, Wilbur Marshall kind of uniforms. And it works because there's a contrast there. And what's concerning is that the uniforms that we saw, the white one, the maroon one, or the burgundy one, sorry, shout to Jim Zorn, and then the all black one, that's what they all are. It's monocolor, and I just don't think that's a good look. I am worried. The red ones, it's okay. I am worried that if they do go to a fourth alternate and it is kind of a gold thing, like you mentioned, I just worried that maybe they're going to look like some 11 bottles of mustard running on the field, and I'm not particularly with that, but you need to mix it up. And I think if maybe you pair like the burgundy jersey with the white pants, or any kind of mix and match like that, I wouldn't even be opposed to black pants and maybe the white jersey or something like that. But just like straight colors all the way through as uniform sets, that's just not my cup of tea. I don't know.
I will say this as well. Even looking at the Washington football team uniforms, they really didn't have to change much. They could have kept it as is and just slapped Commanders on it. I call it the Milwaukee Brewers, Seattle Pilots situation, where because the Pilots were basically bankrupt, they were bought by a bunch of Milwaukee interests, and the lawsuit went all the way down to basically opening day. And while the Brewers wanted to rebrand with black and red, they didn't have enough time. So they just basically, used the seam ripper, took out all the Pilot stuff in gold and just went with the powder blue and gold, which have been the Brewers colors. Of course, they've changed it to darker blue and darker gold and things like that. But it basically ended up becoming the colors. They basically just slapped Brewers on and replaced Pilots and just went with that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying before. I think that I feel like this is Washington football team 1.5, and I think we're still in a transitional phase. And I forgot what the rule is for the NFL, that once you have a uniform set, you have to I think you have to hold on to them for like maybe 5 years. So maybe at the 5-year mark, we're going to see some tweaks, or maybe they'll just quietly retire some of these uniforms that we're seeing now. Maybe they only wear the black ones maybe once, twice, 7 times in 5 years, and they just decide that's not it, and they just stick with the primary stuff. But I agree with you. If we're kind of just talking in generalities about things we like and we don't like, I like if I had to buy one jersey out of the three, it would probably be the white one. There's a Terps vibe to it, Maryland Terps vibe, which I don't mind at all. I like that. I like how they incorporated the DC flag in there. The helmets, the W is fine. I liked how the W is on the front of the black helmets. I think that feels like a kind of a nod to military uniforms a little bit. So I enjoyed that. But things I didn't like, I think Commanders on the red jersey is too big. It's like they put a 14 font when they maybe should only have maybe 11 or 12 fonts. We talked about the monochromeness of it. I'm not really a fan of, but overall, it's all right. That's all I could say.
When I come back to it, I prefer the old Washington uniforms, just the yellow and white on the stripes on the sleeves. I mean, they could have incorporated some of the old ones, sort of
like this one here, the Sonny Jurgensen.
The most recent one.
Okay.
The Redskins football team ones. Because honestly, they could have taken all of that and just maybe darken the tint of the burgundy and things like that. And even then, it wouldn't have changed. I honestly, when you started talking about the Maryland vibe, I started thinking about Maryland's Maryland flag helmet.
Mm-hmm.
What would have been nice is if they sort of did a burgundy and gold version of the DC flag with the three stripes and the three stars, but make it burgundy with yellows, with the stars and stripes yellow. That would have been nice because I mean, whoever's out there, go ahead, take this idea and rebrand the helmets. I'm already over the helmets, but I mean, I even like the numbers on the helmet, which the Alabama nod, because that would have look better. And the W, you just basically put black stencil in the previous logo. It's not even that much of a change. And I think it's a bit of a, while the rebranding of we're going to go into the whole rebranding. I just think some of the designs of some of the logos are a bit lazy, but that's my thing. The seal logo, not bad, but there was talk that they might have just basically lifted it off some soccer club's logo. So
it is very reminiscent of that. Shoot, I lost my train of thought, but why don't you keep going? I'll come back to it.
I know. I just going out to the rollout process. Well, the problem is, as we mentioned before, just I feel like while they did their due diligence, but there were so many incidents. Again, the owner's wife blurting out the 8 possible suggested names. That's one issue. That's the whole thing about the flyover, seeing the team offices and with the name in the window. That's another one. The logo reflecting in the mirror when Ron Rivera or Jason Wright is looking at it in a video. That's another issue. If you expect this team to do anything right, which it hasn't seen, except maybe some of the, they're at least they're trying to shed their previous reputation. It's hard to actually, you look at it, it's like this could have been done better. If you're going to go with the name, that's cool, but you could have done it better. I know. When we go back, let's go back to the Wizards Bullets thing. Yes, Abe Pollin knew he was going to go Wizards all the way. Yes, people can say it was a sham. People to this day have been acclimated to the Wizards, and it works. The thing is, at least Abe Pollin didn't make it look like it was going to be this whole great thing. We're going to listen to our fans, and I mean, technically it did, and some of the suggestions were bad. They were really bad. Some of them were not, but I think that the whole rollout was botched. And even then, there were times on Twitter where they were talking about the whole parking party that happened on the Friday, that happened on February 5th. And the big issue was one of them released, it said Washington Hogs. So how are you going to errantly leak stuff? I don't know if you're trying to do misdirection, some type of shell game along those lines. And even then, it all got foiled because a news helicopter flew over FedEx Field and saw the name of the team in the window. Either it's just sloppy the way they did it. I mean, aside from not picking out all the trademarks they wanted to keep, so somebody wouldn't squat on it, and then basically you would have to pay a king's ransom to get it back. That was my big thing about the rollout. That personally to me, that was the rollout. I feel like it was shoddy business and another line of organization that continues to do screw things up.
No, I agree. And there are a lot of lessons learned. I think part of it is when you have like big time operations like that, just those weird things fall through the cracks. Again, if we can go back to the Cleveland Guardians, they made the whole thing. They had that nice video. Tom Hanks was narrating it. It was all great, but no one ever thought to really, it's like they didn't really do enough Googling to realize that there was a roller derby team that had that name, and it might be an issue if they both have that name and what's going to happen. So, it's just kind of indicative of just bad planning, I think, and just there's probably a groupthink part in a lot of organizations, and especially for something that's run by Daniel Snyder. It's just like there's not enough dissenting voices sometimes or organizations like that aren't empowering their folks to kind of raise their hand and be like, guys, have we thought about that? Because when you have those kind of organizations where everyone is just trying to pull and maybe like appease the boss, then you're going to have mistakes like that because no one is brave enough to speak out. And, that's part of it. And that's just one small part of the list of why Washington has kind of been middle tier in the NFL for a long time. And when they do have success, they kind of fall backwards into it. I think they don't really do that. Credit where credit is due. I think Ron Rivera and the earnest changes I think they've tried to do in the last couple of years, I think they're in the right direction, and I think it comes from a good place. But when it comes to the overall writing of the ship, it has to start at the top, and the same leadership is still there at the top. So that's all you have to say about that.
Yeah, and you're talking about the Guardians, and we were talking about the name change, how they got rid of Chief Wahoo, because honestly, say what you want about the logo, the previous logo of Washington's football team, it was not a blatantly bad caricature of a Native American. That is how that got through for years. That's from the 50s, at least 50s, all the way up to 2000. So how did you go almost 60 years not thinking, except that instance in the 70s where they went with the funky C's, but how did you not think that wouldn't look bad? Even you look back at the Atlanta Braves, going back, you look back in the 40s and 50s, aside from the 80s where they had the screaming Indian logo, even there was one that looked so comical that it looked like something that the Simpsons basically had ripped off as a logo, as a mock logo. And that's just, man, the Indians started in earnest, and then even, like I said, their rollout was done much better. The Guardians rollout was done much better than Washington's. The roller derby thing, be damned. That happened well. But another thing, the day that Washington announced the retirement of their logo, another team in Washington, the Seattle Kraken, I was reading how they went through their whole process. They went through all these things. They made it perfect. They weren't going to use totems because then that would be sort of going backwards after seeing everything else that's happened. You learn from the mistakes of everybody else. They went with something that matched their city, something that matched their region, something that worked, something that they probably acquired the trademark a long time ago, even though I think it was like like the worst kept secret that they were probably going to look at Kraken, but they still pulled it off great. The uniforms look nice and things like that. I feel like that's the third team in this whole discussion. Yeah, we're not going to talk about the Atlanta. We're not going to talk about the Atlanta baseball team. We're not going to talk about the Braves. We're not going to talk about Kansas City Chiefs. Those are not situations that regard a name change because they are not blatantly offensive. And I know we're sort of veering on, what's offensive and what isn't, as opposed to those things. I mean, the Braves have their own issues with their celebratory cheer that they do all the time. But I mean, I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but I'm like this. The three teams that you look at in this whole weird situation: one, Cleveland, who sort of did everything right except for the one little trademark thing in the internet and the website. Two, Washington, that botched everything from the rollout. And the Seattle Kraken, who pretty much, even though they have no real skin in the game in the situation, their announcement of their team name came out the same day that Washington said they're rebranding and they're dropping the old Redskins name.
Yeah. I think the biggest takeaway is that things need to be re-examined, and we can't just say, oh, well, that's the way it's always been, or one guy from 1960 said it's okay for the Cleveland baseball team to be named it is, and carry that on. We have to evolve, we have to change, and if you just want to do the same old, it can't fly. It really can. And we're not, just overall as a society, you can't do that. And I think people are just afraid of change, and they just don't want to change. Maybe there's something in the change that maybe churns something in them that they don't understand or they don't want to recognize. But there's just, if you look back at some of the other logos we mentioned, I mean, we don't have to go through all of them, but Cleveland, there are some Philadelphia Warriors logos that I've seen. They're kind of in the same vein as Cleveland's was back in the day. But just for anybody who's like, oh, I don't know, why are we doing that? It's like, the change has to come, and we have to adjust, right? I'm sure people who I'm sure, like, when the automobile was coming up, people were like, well, we got horses. They're fine. Like, why do we have to do that? Why don't we just use the same horses? It's the same. And just like, you have to recognize progress. It's mentioned on a kind of non-political thing. It's funny you mentioned the Kraken, because what I'm curious about is, like, 10, 15, 20 years from now, how are these names going to hold up, right? The teams that we have grown up following and watching over the years, like, I don't know, like the Packers and the Broncos, the New York Yankees, the Red Wings, all that stuff, those come from a different time of before, like, focus groups and internet voting and everything like that. And those logos and those team names were pretty much organic, or some guy just had a good idea and wrote in one day and they said, hey, let's do it. The Kraken and the Commanders and all those teams now, they're still focus group tested. There's marketing, there are people, there are research firms that kind of do this and they develop, and people, it's a little bit kind of like Moneyball. They're just like, well, people like Kraken, and they it just doesn't come as a light bulb that's going off. It's just like, there's something that's just kind of like, I don't know, it's like a test tube, right? They just kind of make it in a lab instead of just being like, well, this is what it should be. So I'd be curious to see how those logos hold up, because I was thinking, right, we haven't really had a lot of expansion teams in the last 20 years with brand new logos. Baseball had some expansion, and in the 90s, same thing with basketball and some other things, but we haven't really had a lot of, like, brand new teams like the Kraken come up, and I want to see if they stand the test of time, because, like, the Kraken is just like I don't know, it just kind of came into, like, for me anyway, I don't know, into, like, pop culture, like, the last 25, 30 years. It's not something new. I mean, it's not a tried and true thing, like, I don't know, like the Rangers or something like that. So, I, you know, who knows? Maybe the Commanders get changed, or maybe the logos and all that stuff get changed. Not because it's people are necessarily offended by it, but maybe just like it's not cool anymore, or maybe it's not selling enough jerseys or hats or something like that. So
We forgot Golden Knights. The Golden Knights had a
oh
lawsuit with
yeah,
the Army,
yeah,
with the
yes,
West Point, and that's a whole issue. Apparently, the Army was not very happy that you were taking the name of their parachute team and trying to incorporate it as your mascot. And we all know with Seattle, there's one team name that's there, but they're waiting for a basketball team to come back. So Sonics was off the table from the beginning. So we all know if there's a basketball team that comes back, that's going to be the team. I guess the Devil Rays, even they went with a rebranding, going from taking the devil out. I don't remember the full story about that, but I know that they went to the rebrand. They took the whole the Manta Ray thing out, and they went through the rebrand. They went through 3 different jerseys already by itself.
Yeah. I'm curious to see what is going to happen. And yeah, to your point, it's just, especially with rebrandings like the Guardians and the Commanders, which are very recent, you think somebody would have looked back and said, let's not do it like these guys did it because they screwed up. They didn't have an intern or two. They're just like, the entire day, I just want you to Google every permutation of this team and see if there's anybody out there who might have the same thing, who we might have a problem with later on. But I don't know. We're not running teams, so.
Yeah, and like I said, we mentioned the story. There was a guy who held a bunch of trademarks for every Washington team just so he could hold on to it, so that come money time, that you could just buy him off if you needed to. And there were so many different names. And I think about that. Let's say this: if you had the chance to rebrand the team, what would you have named it? Was there an off the board name that you thought of? I know I was thinking of a few teams. I know Defenders would have made sense, but the XFL holds the trademark to that. Sentinels from the Replacements would have been probably the next best thing, and I wouldn't have been surprised. But Warner Brothers holds that. I guess it has no use to it unless they're going to do a Replacements 2 Electric Boogaloo. But I don't think that Sentinels would have been great, because why not? If you're going to go that way, at least lean into all the different things. Stars. How many other teams are named the Stars right now? Dallas, the hockey team, and that's it, because I don't think there are any other sporting teams. I mean, even the USFL found a way to hold on to all their trademarks, and they're trying to do the rebrand and the return and things like that. And they held on to every single, over 30 some odd years, they held on to every single trademark and still have those. And they're bringing back a lot of those teams.
Yeah, for sure. It is tough. And I think that's the other thing where Commanders doesn't ring true at some point, is because we've all grown up playing Madden, and a lot of these, I think we're already spoiled, because a lot of these teams, if you did create a team, all these kind of generic names like Commanders, like Brigade, Armada, all that, we're subconsciously already familiar with them. It's not new, because you've probably made the same. You made a team that's named that for your franchise mode and everything like that. As far as like other names, we were talking before we started live streaming about just the other candidates, other finalists, and they were all kind of like, meh. I mean, honestly, if they had just left it Washington football team, it wouldn't have bothered me that much, really. I was an early advocate of Red Tails, but I think you made a good point. If the team was going good, it's a great way to honor them. However, when the team stinks, in some way, I feel it's a little disrespectful for those folks who, the Tuskegee Airmen and the other folks who fought in World War II, and like, I wouldn't want to kind of besmirch that reputation. So, you kind of rightly so just kind of like maybe like turned me off a little bit on Red Tails, just because I don't want a 3-14 team being like associated with something as like kind of honorable as the Red Tails. So
Would you have taken something like the Hogs if they were
Hogs
going
would
to
have been
lean into it?
fine. Hogs would have been fine, for sure. Um, presidents. I mean, the thing is, the presidents. I feel like it feels more of a baseball team name, right? Senators, representatives, all that stuff. So, um, I mean, if you're going to go with the military theme, admirals, armada, brigade. We were having this discussion. None of those teams have a readily easy nickname, right? Um, Next year when we're watching Fox and we're looking down at the little score box there, I guess I'll just say Washington. I mean, it's not going to say command, or is it going to say COO, like COM? I don't know. Just dumb things like that. Because commanders, you have to say the whole thing, and it's a mouthful. It's 3 syllables. So I'm not sure. But what about you, Earl? What did you have any other kind of alt takes?
Just reading some of the things from military people who just said, really, commanders. People said, I've had horrible commanders. I've had good commanders, and commanders are the people that send you to do all the dirty work and things like that. Commandos, I mean, at least that's a football atmosphere. I know the connotation with commando, but just the fact that honestly, that seems a little more fierce for a football team. That Generals would have never worked just because the reputation with losing and the Harlem Globetrotters and everything else. That's one. I mean, Red Wolves was the trademark, and they apparently either they just didn't try it well enough, or they didn't try to get the thing, or maybe it's too much money to pay for it. I mean, this is I'll take this back for a quick interstitial. I don't know how big you are in the television logos, but before the NBC went to the Peacock, they had this sort of N, which was like a blue triangle and a red triangle.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was they had stolen basically Nebraska's public television station logo, which was the exact logo. And as a result, because they were going to Nebraska public television was going to sue NBC and their I guess as a mea culpa basically said, we'll basically pay you to help you redesign your logo and things like that. Which eventually they end up skipping it anyway and going to the Peacock, one of the like 2 or 3 versions of the Peacock. So it's like you think about it, it really is why I think they didn't do the due diligence. They could have probably helped those teams, whoever the Red Wolves were, to get that. I mean, this way you don't want to go Warriors. This could still sort of talk about the region. And maybe if you wanted to loosely associate with probably Native Americans without being any more insulting than they probably have been, that could have worked. But I mean, we all know the biggest thing is now the fight song. The fight song now, which I mean, before they basically modernized it, that was a very offensive song back then too. I mean, I don't know how they're going to do that. I don't know if they're just going to keep the same rhythm and all that other stuff, or they're just hail to the Commanders. I
mean, hail to the Chief. I don't know, but you can't do that because there's the Kansas City Chiefs, and I think that's the other hard part about Washington is like, what do you associate with? Politicians, right? Okay, for a myriad of reasons, you can't have a team named politicians or anything like that for a lot of reasons. Just because, I don't know, you just don't want to do that. It's just like, if I played a word association game and I said Washington D.C., like what else do you think about? Monuments, museums, Ben's Chili Bowl. I mean,
Mumbo sauce. I mean,
go.
I mean, see, and the Wizards basically have bought most of that. The Monumental Television, Monument Entertainment, the Capital City Go-Go. Apparently, Ted Leon's is apparently thinks a little bit better on the fly than Dan Snyder does. So that's a whole different thing. And old man Lerner is basically taking what MLB gave him. So
yeah. So I don't know. Like I said before, I think any people who are maybe a little like blasé on the name change, or it's annoying. If Washington goes on a run next year, they win a division, they go deep in the playoffs. a lot of it would be forgiven, and some of that griping I think will eventually die down. And there's some diehards who will just be like, nope, I know what the team name is, and I'm always going to call them that, and that's their prerogative. I feel it's a little short-sighted, and you're looking a little stubborn, but it's a free country, right? So
I wonder how they're going to do throwbacks. If they're going to do any type of throwback, how do you do that now? What do you do? Do you just go? Do you go back with the football team uniforms from last 2 years, or which I don't know how that's going to work or what they're thinking about. But
well, I know
throwbacks are big money.
I know, yeah. Well, I mean, any different uniform opportunity to make money, and I've kind of dialed back on like I'm purchasing a lot, but I mean, it always tempts me like, oh yeah, but it's more of a baseball thing. Baseball does kind of the faux backs, right? We mentioned the Rays before. The Rays had uniforms that were designed kind of in the same vibe as uh, like the mid 70s, like Padres uniforms. And obviously they didn't exist then. It would really be a little freaky for NFL too, but I mean, I guess they could. I mean, I guess you could still wear the kind of throwbacks you were mentioning, from kind of the early part of the Washington days, and you just remove the logos, right? And you just have you keep the colors and you have the vibe, but you just don't have those patches and everything like that. But I don't know. We'll see.
I will have to ask you this. What was your thought on especially the NFL cracking down on the different variety of throwback helmets? I know they want everybody to have one particular shell to use for player safety. I mean, what were your thoughts on that? I know, like, when you look at the Washington homecoming ones where they had that sort of brown shell that's supposed to replicate the leather helmet, they can't wear it anymore, and it didn't make any sense. Whereas sometimes they'd wear the old team name helmet, or they would just wear a plain burgundy helmet.
Yeah, well, I think actually they finally relaxed that, and I think that's why it allows Washington to have a couple helmets now. When they did have it in play, I thought it was just really no fun league, kind of fodder, right? And it prevented us from seeing some really cool throwbacks, right? Because I think Tampa Bay wanted to go back to the creamsicles, but NFL was like, you have a pewter helmet, you cannot also have a white helmet because of safety, blah blah blah. So we're going to nix that. But I think there's a lot of possibilities out there for sure, and we'll see.
It's funny when you talk about Tampa Bay. I always thought about if they a perfect redesign, mixing the current logo with the other one, just a white helmet with the creamsicle face mask, but the current flag, but change the colors from red and a white and a pewter to basically orange flag with the red skull on it. That would have been, at least you would have, and the saber and everything else, that would have at least incorporated a lot of stuff. You could still do creamsicle with, I mean, even with the current red jerseys, I feel like that could have worked in a different pair of pants. But
yeah, and it's all evolution, right? I mean, nothing is static, not the names, not the uniforms, and obviously not progress. And everything kind of comes full circles. I have a Penguins jersey behind me, and that one is from that's kind of the Mario Lemieux early '90s style with a skating penguin, and they went to the robot penguin with different colors, and then they came back to the skating penguin in the same colors, but eventually they're back to the colors back there, the original, the OG kind of Pittsburgh Steelers, Pittsburgh Pirates, yellow and black. So I can see Washington probably coming full circle in a way, obviously not fully, but and maybe 10 years from now, maybe it does look like the Washington uniforms that we grew up watching again, with like Ernest Biner and like Art Monk and Daryl Green, so.
I will have to ask you this, even though it's not Washington related. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the Nets NBA city jerseys, which is an amalgamation of basically all the different phases of the New Jersey, New York Nets, where it's basically the Nets writing from the Derek Coleman days, the X's on the side from the Jason Kidd, Kerry Kittles days, and the darker color and the dark blue with the red from the Buck Williams days.
I enjoy them. The NFL kind of. I'm sorry, not the NFL. The NBA like City Edition and Earned Edition and whatever the heck, all the kind of like corporate branding synergy uniform what they call it. I really enjoy them. Memphis kind of has thrown back to like the early 2000s with like Michael Dickerson and Pau Gasol and all that. And it just kind of tickles my nostalgia bone a little bit. And I like it. I enjoy it. The Sixers jerseys that they're wearing, it kind of gives me like a late 70s, early 80s vibe with the lettering. And but the colors are different, so it kind of makes it different, but it still has kind of a tinge of retro, which I appreciate.
Yeah, like the Spectrum type of font and things like
Yeah.
that. I want the Captain American uniforms to come back. They can, as Noah's maligned as it is, they can modify that to today's taste and make it something that is a little more palatable for Sixers fans. I mean, or that rare rookie year Iverson one, the Dana Barros, Clarence Witherspoon ones, that was in between the Iverson rebrand and the Barkley Captain America ones. That was at like short. The Scott Skiles jerseys, as I call them, as well. One thing that we always talk about with the change of a team and a uniform, the rebrand bump. Do you think this can actually help with the bump and success of Washington, especially their very young team? They got a very good defense. I know the biggest situation is quarterback, but do you feel like the change in the uniforms and that will bring the bump that often happens with a lot of teams? I mean, we saw it with the Orioles going to the rebrand right before 2012, and then they had that string of success up till basically September 2017.
Oh, for sure. One, the whole rebrand is it's over, so it's not hanging over their heads. You don't have anybody, the media, you don't have people asking. You won't have any more people asking about that now because it's over. It's been decided and it's done. So the guys can just focus on winning. And the other thing too, even for us who are like, I don't know, these uniforms, they're all right. We're of a different generation. It's the same, I think for us who might have like poo-pooed like something what the Oregon Ducks do all the time. But the kids like it, the young folks, the people they're recruiting are into it. And I can see the same thing for Washington. I mean, just change their uniforms automatically give them an extra 4 wins? No, but it at least gives them something to be excited about. And who knows? They're on the cusp. I mean, they surprisingly, even though they won 7-9, they won the division a couple years ago, and they kind of collapsed. But they were kind of spunky there when I thought I personally had kind of written them off, and they'd figured it out. I mean, yeah, you mentioned it. Is Taylor Heineke the answer at quarterback? I don't know. Probably not. And the defense, that was the strength 2 years ago, not so much last year. But there's still some stuff to be excited about. Hopefully Chase Young will be back and almost as good as new. And they have a draft pick. Maybe they'll take a quarterback or an offensive lineman or something like that. And we'll see. We'll see. I mean, it's a tough division.
Yeah, and like I said, a new quarterback could probably change the fortunes. We're not saying someone like Aaron Rodgers or even Jimmy Garoppolo, who or somebody like that will be there. Russell Wilson, anybody else that we haven't named yet could be there, but who knows? I mean, a quarterback could probably be the difference maker for that team, and can mask a lot of issues, and who knows? And we're gonna look at that. Ben, I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to do this, because definitely when a lot of people don't notice, sometimes I try to get stuff done in advance, but this is something that I was like, hey Ben, you want to do this? And he's like, yeah, anytime. These are the dates I'm free. Do this, and it worked out, especially on a Friday night because I know people have lives, and Friday nights are times people enjoy after a long work week. But Ben, what are ways people can talk to you about the Commanders or uniforms in general, or collecting jerseys or anything along the hats or anything along those lines?
Well, I mean, if you want to, I don't post a lot. I just basically retweet and like a lot of things. But if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Penserga25. So that's P as in Paul, ENSERGA 25. Myself and two other Washington fans, Keith and Brad, we have a movie podcast, Movies and a Meal. So if you want to follow that, that's on Twitter, it's Movies and a Meal. And, we put out episodes twice a week. We have a movie episode and we have a TV episode that come out on Sundays and Wednesdays. And, if you want to look for that podcast, we're on anywhere that you can find podcasts, basically Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. But, those are the ways you can reach. But, I'm always happy to come on, man. It's kind of a lot of this kind of intersects a lot of things that I am interested in, which is like uniforms and sports and, that kind of things, and a little dash of my continued eternal love for G.I. Joe. So like all these things kind of mixed together in a weird way. But I'm happy to talk about it. I'm happy to nerd out on things like that.
They need to make a deal with Hasbro to have Cobra Commander to be the mascot, because if they don't, they're missing out. Because I've already seen a couple people say, like, if it isn't Cobra Commander, then what are you guys doing? Cobra
I've
Commander
seen a lot of memes. I saw a lot of memes in the last couple of days with Cobra Commander and Daniel Snyder, and just infer what you want with that.
I guess Cobra Commander apparently is more likable than Dan Snyder, but it doesn't take much. Ben, I really appreciate it. What we'll do is we'll wrap this up off air for everybody who has been watching. I really appreciate it. The plan is we're turning this around, and we're going to probably make this a part of a special Super Bowl episode. Now I just need to find somebody who can talk about prop bets and the weird things that go on in the Super Bowl. But for my guest, Ben Penserga, I am Earl Holland saying thanks for listening, you guys, and have a good one.